Welcome viewers to this series of lectures on early Indian history, and of late we have been talking about the stages, different stages that historians have come to classify the economic profile of early Indian history into, and we have already run through 4 such lectures earlier, where we discussed from the earliest times to the times, say, across the Harappan civilization down to the early Vedic period. And this lecture is primarily about the stage next that historians come to classify in terms of early Indian economy, and that is the later Vedic period. So the timeline is, say, from around 1000 BC to 600 BCE. So it is these 500 years, 500 odd years that we are talking about, and as you will do well to recall, in our earlier interactions we have spoken of some of the economic activities that can be detected through the sources like Rigved and several other archaeological remains in the form of some cultures, some betraying little bit of continuity with the Harappan civilization as well, some appearing in contrast with the one that we get to see as part of the civilizational complex of Harappa, and that is something that we discussed under the early Vedic phase or early Vedic stage of economy, where essentially it is pastoral economy that we are talking about. It is Rigvedic hymns are replete with references to cow, that is go, and it probably was the chief form of wealth, very central to the life and times of the Rigvedic period. There are several terms related to war, related to distance, related to time, that are also drawing its nomenclature from the root word go, and so forth. So these are the ways in which historians have come to make a broader sense of the economic profile of the Rigvedic period. Rigved by itself does not proclaim that they belong to pastoral times, like we today say for ourselves that we are living in the industrial age, we are living in the digital age, and so forth. So something like that is not articulated. Rigvedic source material by itself is not of that genre where it intends to inform the posterity about their times and so forth. They are hymns sung to propitiate gods, and we as historians have to make some sense out of it, make some mundane sense out of it in terms of the life and times of the ordinary people, of drawing some kind of economic profile. It's not a document related to economy and so forth, yet through the hymns, through the offerings, through several stray references, we make sense of it. And this is precisely what we are going to continue with in today's lecture, and that is also divided into two parts. Both will talk about the later Vedic period, and one can detect a fair bit of change from around, say, 1000 BC onwards down to 600 BC, and thereafter again some kind of a drastic change. And that is why historians today tend to study them as different brackets of economy, as different stages of economy, because from there one can see that some bit of or some tangents of economy are registering substantial change. So if you look at, say, Professor R. Sharma's work on early Indian economy, where he has attempted to give stages of early India, This period, that is the later Vedic period, is labeled as plough cultivation and agricultural economy. So, in terms of economy, one can label it as plough cultivation and agricultural economy. So, there is this centrality of plough cultivation, which is in his work at least it's not there as part of Rigvedic times. So, from say 1500 BC to around 1000 BC, there is very little reference to, almost nil reference to cultivation activities, operations, and equipments and grains and so forth. But from the later Vedic times, it appears. It's not as if pastoralism has completely been done away with. Pastoralism continues, but now that becomes a supplement to plough cultivation, and it is the agricultural economy that assumes the centrality in the life and activities of people from around 1000 BC onwards. And if we presume, although historians debate over it, whether the Aryans came from outside or are they indigenous, or they are the same who lived in the Harappan times and so forth. So, keeping that debate aside, there is some. There is a distinct evidence of new areas, new land patches getting colonized by people, and those people who are living in the Sapta Sindhu area from the earlier period, say Rigvedic period. Now it seems that the focus has shifted, or there is some kind of an eastward migration. Some historians don't prefer to study things this way, or at least present things this way. Nevertheless, for the convenience of the listeners, at the cost of simplification, we can say that now it is the Upper Gangetic Basin alongside the Indo-Gangetic divide that seems to be colonized by these people, by the Aryans. And this area, if you look at the soil profile of the Upper Gangetic Basin, so what is the Upper Gangetic Basin here? Upper Gangetic Basin would be, say, the entire stretch of the Gangetic Plain is divided into three phases, or you can say three categories: the Upper Gangetic Basin, the Middle Gangetic Basin, and the Lower Gangetic Basin, so where it meets the Bay of Bengal. So, Upper Gangetic Basin would be from the origin of Ganga to, say, present-day Prayag, Allahabad, and from there to, say, present-day, from Prayag to present-day Bhagalpur in Bihar, will be part of Middle Gangetic Valley, and thereafter down to the Sundarban Delta, it would be part of Lower Gangetic Valley. So, they are all plain areas, but the soil typology here is a little different. It's more sandy and loamy soil that we encounter here, this being the flood plain. And the typical vegetation in the Upper Gangetic Basin is very thin, and this could have posed very little problem for clearance and settlement so far as agrarian society is concerned. So, when you talk of a forest patch getting cleared by people to make it fit for agriculture, obviously you are either talking, given the constraints of the times that we are talking about, you are either talking of burning the forest by fire or clearing it somehow. Now, if you are burning it, that's different, but if you are clearing it using some equipment, obviously you require some kind of equipment using metals to clear these forests. But the upper Gangetic Basin does not give you very dense cluster of forests, and so it's not as if in the absence of iron tools you could not have cleared it. So there is this debate amongst historians about the role or centrality of iron technology in bringing about this transformative change, say from around 7th, 6th, 5th centuries BC in this part of India. And some historians hold iron as central to this transformation. Some say that, well, it was one of the many other factors responsible for it. So, if you look at the soil typology, it seems that the vegetation here could have been sparse, and it would not have offered some kind of resistance to being cleared even otherwise. Even if you are not using fire, even otherwise, it could have been it could have not been so difficult to clear it. Why I am saying so is because even if you look at the later day, say medicinal texts, say if you read Charak, if you read Shushruta and so forth, you discover that this geography is largely categorized as jungle area, right? As opposed to the Anup area. Now, Anup area is the binary opposite of jungle. Anup area would be, say, the lower Gangetic Valley, where you have thick, almost evergreen forests. The soil is full of rocks. It's hilly area. It's not a plain area. The vegetation is thick. And its other counterpart will be the jungle area, which is the area that we are talking of, where the vegetation is sparse, where the terrain is flat, where there is less water, so precipitation is less. And if you look at the rain carrying capacity of the monsoon winds from Bengal area down to the Punjab area, you will find that the rain carrying capacity or moisture carrying capacity gradually decreases of the monsoon winds also. So this area does receive a little less rainfall as compared to the lower Gangetic Valley and so forth. So it's perfectly consistent with what we know through other sources about the ecological description of this area. So sandy and loamy soil and thin vegetation would not have posed much of a problem for clearing this area for agriculture. So, if we look at the, say, Shatapatha Brahman, which is part of later Vedic text, there are several other texts that we can use to reconstruct an impression of the later Vedic times. Shatapatha Brahman is one such. And here we get to hear of Vidheg Madhav story where it has been alluded to that the Rajanya carries a stick with fire, and it is usually done in association with a Brahmin, a priest, and he throws it in the jungle area, and the point at which the stick falls with fire, till that area, that entire zone becomes his. So some kind of ownership right is bestowed and this expression, this articulation is ritual, but historians have tried to decode this to make some sense in terms of socio-political realities and economy, the way it must have been during the later Vedic period. So in that story, it is alluded to that till Sadanir area till Sadanir river Sada Neer literally would mean river, a perennial river. So Neer is Pani, Sada is all the time. So up to North Bihar area, which would be, say, the upper Gangetic valley, the way we talked about it in geographical terms. So towards the end of the later Vedic period, say 700 BC, 600 BC, till around that period, this area seems to have been colonized, the upper Gangetic basin and some bit of middle Gangetic basin as well. And now it seems that forest burning, which is very common, which is very commonly referred to as a practice in the early Vedic literature and later Vedic literature also, now perhaps is getting supplemented by the use of iron axe. Why? Probably for cutting forests in the eastern UP and northern Bihar. Remember, now you have greater density as you move towards the lower Gangetic basin. The density of forest cover is more, and therefore you require harder metal over and beyond stone to clear forests to make it fit for agriculture. So if we get overriding evidence of agriculture having become the mainstay of economy in the later Vedic period, or at least towards the end of it, then the chances for iron technology having played a crucial role in this obviously becomes little more. And so there is a strong case for it, although some historians don't agree to it, don't give much importance to this in comparison to several other social organizational and political organizational changes as well in the colonization of this area, in agrarianization of this area, you can say, in this area having become agriculture centric so far as living is concerned. So if we scan the sources here, contemporary sources, plough, agricultural plough is referred to have been made of udumbar. It's a kind of tree or timber that was specifically used to make plough. And the plowshare, which is often debated about amongst historians, is made of khadir timber. So these are two different typologies of timber that are mentioned in relation to plough and plowshare respectively. Udumbar for plough making and khadir for plowshare. Now, it is again a matter of debate amongst historians that whether iron plowshare was used, and if it was used, was it used very popularly, or was it only limited to certain upper echelons of society. So we can go on debating it, but if we look at the big picture in terms of this period, later Vedic period, we have several other evidence, say related to agriculture or centrality of agriculture also coming from the contemporary sources. For example, yoking of several oxen to the plough. Now, the numbers could have been conventional, but the sheer quantity, the sheer number of oxen that are mentioned, say 6, 8, 12 and even 24. So 24 oxen required to pull a plough through the soil to make it, to till the soil, right, to plough the soil. Now, why do we require this many number of oxen to pull a plough? And that perhaps answers the question that this area, Middle Gangetic Valley and the Upper Gangetic Valley to some extent, required deep ploughing. And deep ploughing would mean that the subsoil moisture has to be used for agricultural purpose. and for that you require more traction power, and that's why this increased number of oxen tied to the plow for yoking purpose, for plowing purpose, is mentioned. So one can imagine that, well, by this time iron technology being known to people, iron could have been used as plowshare, although there is a question mark on it because we have not been able to find that many iron plowshare evidence archaeologically, although the answer of historians supporting the criticality of iron plowshare and centrality of agriculture is that not much rural archaeology have been carried out, and it is only in the rural ambience that you expect to find iron plowshare. You don't find it in urban areas. Urban dwellers don't do agriculture, don't do plowing, so why would you find iron plowshare there? And therefore, whatever the range of iron artifacts that we have belonging to this period, it's a very minuscule proportion of it that we find as iron plowshare and so forth. Nevertheless, later Vedic references also allude to dark or black metal, Shyam Ayas, Krishna Ayas. So they probably referred to black metal, and black metal can stand for iron that we are talking about. Shatvat Brahman devotes one entire Brahman, one entire section to the rites, rituals in connection with the agricultural operations, say in connection with plowing. So how plowing is to be done, what is to be done before this, what are the rituals to be followed and so forth. And that again tells you that now agriculture is becoming more and more important, and that's why you have a paraphernalia of rites and rituals built around it. So besides barley and wheat, which certainly were grown, say, in the early part of the later Vedic times, by the end of later Vedic period, rice makes its entry into the later Vedic texts, and even archaeologically we have evidence of rice cultivation happening in the upper Gangetic basin. So rice, which is referred to by the name vrihi, looms large in later Vedic texts as compared to the early Vedic references of grains, where only yava as a generic term is used for grains, for agricultural grains. So that's the scenario, and the subsequent part of this trajectory of economic change in the later Vedic times, talking about the centrality of vrihi or rice, centrality of iron or iron technology not being that central and so forth, is what we shall undertake in the next part of this lecture. Thank you.